Thank you. That was a very kind introduction. All of the recent achievements included. Thank you. So yes, I will share a little bit about myself as well, but I have an overview. But firstly, thank you for coming. It's relatively positive that we're a smaller group because I can actually speak directly and individually with you all, because it's really interesting to hear that you have mentored and have also been a mentee on the other side too, and you'll see throughout the process of this talk that there is a little bit of back and forth, and there should be a little bit of back and forth as well as part of this. So I'll run through just really quickly a little bit about me, which is quite important just for the setting the scene component of why I've chosen to set up a mentoring platform in the first place, but also just of the challenges that you may face throughout mentoring, including how we might define the role, because it is a bit muddy. This thing called the hidden curriculum, which came out of a Manchester research report a couple of years ago, how you may go about mentoring itself from a structure and framework perspective, but then also how this might help yourselves if you are on the other side too. So there's going to be a lot of information thrown your way. There's a lot of text in here. I have thrown in a few slides of images and a few quirky conversations with my younger brother who's just come into architecture as well. But then I'll explain right at the end what narrative practice is, what we do, how it started, because that's quite important. And then right at the end it says group mentorship, but actually that's a little bit more us now sitting down and flipping the questions to you as well. So I'd like to engage as much as we can. So yes, I won't repeat much more of this, but I am an educator, I am an architect, and I have started this thing called narrative practice, which has over the past 5 years, it's 5 years old this month, which is quite timely for this talk as well. But more recently, and you mentioned Victoria Thornton as part of the Thornton Education Trust. Most recently, I've got the Emerging Individual of the Year, which is also a lovely little thing to start off the year. So HFM is a primarily research and retail-based practice. We see opportunities on high streets and try to see what we can do with these spaces. So working alongside people like the NHS and local councils. For example, bottom left is a new NHS community diagnostic centre, which used to be a second-hand furniture shop and a kebab shop. And it's quite interesting to bring that into the high street because it removes the long waiting times for patients to get to for their diagnostics, bringing it down to, I think, 40 minutes, which is really successful. Anyway, that's what we do there. Wrapped up a project at the Royal Exchange recently as well, just working in that grade 1 listed environment I teach. So there's a row of Brighton there, a row of Sheffield there, and a row of Central St Martin's. Syracuse, I'm currently teaching there at the moment, so I don't actually have some slides for that. But some lovely, wonderful, constructive work. And I'm showing you these because the idea is that I teach because I have learnings from practice. I practice because there are learnings from teaching, and I want to mentor because I think all of these should be applied throughout. And I think I always said that I always wanted to be this three-legged creature that does all of these three things at the same time. And what I wanted to quickly go through is a third-year project, my final year thesis project, which actually defines what narrative practice is in the first place. What you see here are just different symbolic mnemonic devices that I'd use as part of my 5th year to try to understand my own background. I'll come on to that shortly. The beads up there are memory devices. These are devices that my father used on his way to England at the time. There's some temple structures here, and the idea was, how can I represent this as a more architectural and more physical form? And so I created these cakes, and it was all about trying to represent my own experience within this project. It was very important to me at the time because my dad was very, very, very unwell. He was going through surgery multiple times, and he had this very severe, serious heart surgery. And the issue was that I just wanted to give him a Christmas present that year, and I didn't know if I was going to, and so this was going on at that time. it gets a little bit crazy as I sort of went through that project, trying to develop it. But the principle here was that I was trying to overlap all these memories that I had, because no memory is linear in its nature, and neither are our conversations or our practice, and that's where I was going with this. And alongside this document, there was this thesis that I was building, that we should critique the way we present and critique the way that we build our narratives in practice, because I thought it was going to work in practice full time at this point. And so I was describing these really funky, crazy components in a really theatrical, a sort of very mnemonic way. And I ended the project with these really sort of chaotic looking images, but they were really important for me at the time, because in that I realized that there was this static form of architecture that disappeared. There was no static form. I could read it from multiple angles, and it created this sort of symbolic space for me. But that then leads on to why I started narrative practice 5 years ago. I'd finished up, I'd just qualified, I'd done all of these things, and one of the things was actually, well, I've done all of that, I don't want to lose any of that. And I believe that narrative actually is more than practice. And so therefore, these small symbols, I mean, the more than signs themselves, because genuinely I thought that narrative was more than practice, and I wanted to bake that into my practice. So that was 5 years ago. And this is just a snippet of one of our mentoring sessions from narrative practice that, as Lucy mentioned, we bring this platform within practice, and we try to ensure that young people are opened up to the world of the practice, and I'm trying to break down that barrier to say, well, these aren't really awful, not kind, unfriendly people. You can actually speak with these people. And so you see these sort of ratios of people, which I'll go into later, because I'd like to just talk about why I do this. My parents, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and their parents, so I'm talking 1930s at this point, or maybe even earlier, 1920s or so, they were born in East Africa. So I'm an East African Indian. I feel like you don't meet many East African Indians in your day-to-day lives. And so I just want to share that there was a war, and they were involved in it, and they had to leave. So therefore, as Indians, practicing Hinduism, from all of the projects, from the project components that you might have seen earlier, they had to leave. They had to leave. They were in a setting where they didn't know where they would go. And so they thought that, oh yeah, we have to go back to India. Well, we're Indian. They're brown, and we should. That's where we live. But actually, if you go in as a Mozambican, which is Portuguese colony at the time, and to improve Portuguese colony at the time, you were given Portuguese nationality by the state. So that means that I'm Portuguese by nationality. I'm British now because I was born here. But they had to pay more taxes than India, just as people, as a working citizen. Anyway, they decided, no, we're going to leave, because the UK was still part of Europe at the time, so they could. And my dad at the time went through all the different cities in Europe, Oslo, Hamburg, Lisbon, and then ended up in Dublin. Dublin, tried to come over into Liverpool by ferry, put into jail because he was like, oh, you're an Indian man with a Portuguese passport. That's not a real thing. Anyway, that's the whole story, and that's my parents. And I bring this up because I was then born in 91. That's not 91, of course. But we grew up in these sort of council estate environments. It's what my parents could afford at the time. But guess what happens to social housing? It gets knocked down for other things. And we then moved to another estate. My parents still live here. I see them maybe once every month, once every 2 months. It's always great to go back to this place. And they fully brought me up with this idea of seva. And seva is basically just giving without anything in return. And so at this point, I want to say, I'm at this point coming to university. I'm thinking, okay, well, what are my options here? So an East Indian African that's not grown up with much financial support, with parents that are both immigrated to the UK. My parents still speak in a very Indian accent, a slightly more Yorkshire twang now, which is quite interesting. That and you know, where do you go with that? Where do I go? But they've always said, and this principle of saying, you just give to your communities and see what happens. Anyway, architecture then was one of those things where I gave to my local community centre, got into architecture, and so I made my way to university. So that's just a little bit of background to say why I started doing what I do in the first place. I give because I want to make sure that, this is quite an interesting way of saying this, but I want to make sure that my parents know that I'm giving, which is really interesting to say out loud, because I've never really said that out loud either. But just that setup in itself means that I had to create a framework for actually doing this properly. And so just jumping into the gaps that we now see in architecture. So throughout my education, I was the only, or one of, I think I was saying this earlier in the week, which is 10 or so, or maybe 5 or so, minorities when I went to and did my undergraduate at Westminster. This is in 2010. It was a really sad story at the time, because it was like, all right, it's just a bunch of us and there's 140 students. That's not a good ratio. Anyway, the great thing is all 10 of us ended up graduating together after that 3-year period. And that 140 had whittled down to about 35. So it says something about the sort of determination that we had, but also there's a big challenge there. So just from secondary education, 0.5% of all UK secondary education students identifying as global majority ethnicity individuals going to pursue higher education. What does that mean? That's too many words. 1 out of 2,000 is what that means. You know, the idea that from a school you are coming into architecture, there's only one person of colour. That's what I'm trying to get across here. And that's from Department for Education Statistics. And then we've seen this multiple times. And this inequality is just even, I mean, it's not getting any better anytime soon. And so I won't even repeat it. And the last one here talks about why. And this is really important for me because it does talk about that parental support. And it does talk about that provision for schools themselves to be able to support the students. Sometimes careers advisors just don't have the right skills to be able to do it. So in this case here, well, who's going to do that? Sometimes the practices will turn around and say, oh, well, it's not us. The schools will say it's not us. The university will, well, someone has to. And this is one of the reasons why I would like to step in, or at least I'm trying to step in. What is mentoring? Mentoring gets murky and gets muddy, and there's multiple different meanings. I think in this 1991 research paper that I took these 3 from, I think there were something like 51 definitions or something like that, something crazy. And frankly, they all mean something to someone. For me, in this context, I want to emphasize that it's helping them grow. Goals is a really key word. That it's planned. But more importantly, and as you've already kind of, or as we have alluded to, it's reciprocal, because you can be a mentee and you can be a mentor at the same time. That's really important. That's really, really important to me. And so therefore these definitions and perspectives keep changing. You can be one and you can be the other. But I take this four-prong approach. I'm going to flick through all until we can see all 4. And it really highlights those 3 key definitions from earlier. Because what I'm trying to say here is that you should be, if you are going to be committing to mentoring, if you're going to be supporting someone, and you're not expecting anything in return, that's the underlying message here, that you're dedicating your effort and your time, that you are planning, you are supporting that individual through their future career. And in return, you will also get something, but I'll come on to what you might achieve from it later. And so my brother said to me one day, I think I want to study architecture. And I said, are you sure? Because it's tough. And, you know, we're all going through this, this field, and it's a tough one. To which she then said, yeah, I think I want to go to UCL, and I've heard it's good. And I said, okay, I'll help you out. But we need to do this. We need to meet. We need to make sure this is planned. And he just said, yeah, all right. But the more sort of structured approach to this is actually that we've taken some of those prongs and said, okay, we do have aims, we do have tasks, and we do have a set time that we're going to apply to this. And one of the things, if anything, from this evening that's taken away is structure is really important when you're talking about people's goals and aims. Incredibly important, especially when it comes to long-term mentoring and this idea of cross-generational impact that you'll be making. It's very important that a younger person, when they're reaching out to someone with more experience, who generally may be older, understands that they have certain skills that they bring to the table too. And in this case, it may be this idea of technology and innovation, but they do also carry this weight of, well, I've got to make sure that I do all of these things to appease, because the teaching and the secondary school structure at this time, I believe, is very strict. You achieve this, you go and do this, and that's what you are able to give. Whereas actually, that's not really mentorship, that's just statements being made to you. And I think, therefore, then, that these young people then just didn't have access to mentors. And we're very lucky, and there was quite a lot of you that said, yes, you've had a mentor. We're very lucky to have had that. And I have too, but I've had to sometimes go out of my way to find these people. And I think the issue here is that some people or some teachers or some careers advisors or some schools just may not see the benefit overall for supporting these young professionals or students. And so, these sort of really key, hard-hitting facts that I've found from various different sources that you can take pictures. 75% of senior members credit their mentors with helping them reach their current level of success. And then 40% of millennials are still without a mentor. 90% are likely to give back by being interested in becoming a mentor. 78% are more likely to participate in civic engagement and volunteer more regularly. The one that really, really annoys me, but also is really promising, is that if all of these were to happen, there's 130% more likelihood that they'll hold leadership positions. And so therefore, they'll give back through civic engagement, they'll give back through their communities, and they're more likely to invest in other people. And I think that's really, really important. And then comes this hidden curriculum, because we're all told to go away and do things at university or in university environments by design tutors, and I'm on the other side of that now. That I'm meant to be preparing these, but there is this hidden curriculum of, oh, well, there's this unknown. What exactly is it that we're meant to be teaching, or what is it that I'm meant to be learning? And the key thing, or the key issue that keeps coming back, is that loans, workloads, and training all lead up to this idea of stress. And then the idea of stress as well is that you have this heavy and constant workload. You do have this culture of working hard. You have these subjective aesthetics that are derived from these individual universities, but really, most importantly, the troubling thing is that they say that their tutors and peers are more likely to influence their decisions going forward. And I think that's really important, because guess what? These studies and these topics that come out of what university least prepares you for, guess what? Do you want to guess what word's in the middle here? So what do we think that practice least prepares you for the practice environment? Sort of in the question, I guess. It's practice itself, which is really, I mean, it's shocking. There is another version of this as well, which is, what does it most prepare you for? And that says design. And that's quite an interesting thing to hear back. So just as part of this, there's also the study that the leaders or the mentors, or the ones that think they are the mentor or have been given the role of the mentor within these practices, or these, specifically in this study, it's creative, and it's related to well-being. And it's that they're just not trained enough to be able to deal with these situations of, and these very personal aspects, very specifically. And how, well, you know, I start by saying all these problems and things like that, but I'm trying to also bring in some solutions here too. So coping with that stress, planning, time management, getting better over time, rewarding nature of the work, yes, that's fine. But also, guess what, or who would actually help the whole situation in the first place? The tutors and peers again. It all sort of comes back in one cyclical form. And so therefore, what can we action as part of this, right? So integrating this long-term mentoring into practice, or even into academia. I'd like to say over the past 5 years and the last 2 years, what I've been trying to do is integrating this into practice. But I think it all stems from academia, unfortunately, because the academics also go back into practice. And so therefore, yes, there is this one-to-one nature that we could start employing within practice. And that's quite common. Yeah, you'll be in practice, or architecture practice very specifically, and you'll have a one-to-one chat or a one-to-one mentoring relationship with someone. That person may be great at networking and connecting you to all these people, but they may lack simple experience of, simply the experience of CVs and portfolio support. So therefore, that person may not be suitable for that person at every step of the way. So, well, how do you improve that? So then the next step is group mentorship. So with this internal peer network. So this, in one way, is a group mentoring relationship where one person might have a question and you are then able to open up the forum and say, okay, we're going to help you out that way. Maybe a group of 15 might be a bit too many. I'm thinking 5. And then the more practical things, like, well, how do you do this? Because I think we all think we know how to mentor, but maybe there are very specific ways that we could sit down and think to ourselves how we could be a bit more structured in our approach. And this is what I always say to my volunteers as part of narrative practice too. Well, we should always start with a check-in. Just make sure they're okay. If they are on the edge or on the verge of crying, let's take them away. They've come here to talk about something really sensitive. Let's have a private conversation. But even in that first moment, how are you, it sets the scene. But also builds that trust, of course. The second point, key action points. It's always good to have something written or have something to look forward to. And I think that's always quite important as part of this. I'll come on to an example that we use as part of our monthly mentoring. But the key thing is that it's all actionable. Thirdly, making sure you always leave with next steps. And I always say this point to my students, even in Design Studio, is that when you're presenting, you should always say, if you're not finished with your project, you should always say, oh, these are my next steps and this is how I intend to continue. Even in this situation, it's always a good thing to say, okay, this is how we're going to continue from this. And it really just establishes that point of, oh, I know where I'm going to start our next conversation. This is a form that we use. This is from last week from HFM Architects. It's really simple in its nature. It says, what's your name, what's my name? Are you in practice or university? What topics have we discussed today and what are the actions? It's really simple. But that gives us a really good point to then say, okay, this month they came for CV and portfolio support. Next month, we can then have a conversation about design choices within their design project, for example. And we have a lot of this sort of long-term conversations going on too. Something has happened. I'm going to try and bring this back. I've got it, don't worry. A lot of clicking, but we'll get there. And on that note, we should talk about adopting positive language as well. So those mentoring relationships, we have in a room about 40 students sometimes. And one of the key things that we try to do is ensure that we're speaking in a friendly, positive manner with them in every moment possible. So therefore, there's this idea of timely feedback that we should be giving, even in that moment that we give them 30 minutes, where we give them 30 minutes. We want to speak very openly about them being in a safe space and being able to say whatever they would like, because imposter syndrome, as I was saying to Grant earlier, is something that really continues all the way throughout our education, our professional lives, even when you're in meetings. When I first meet a client, I'm always, oh, right, I need to say things in a certain way. I still feel that sometimes. But just to let that person know that it's okay, it's entirely fine. But also being able to, at the same time, and this goes back to that four-prong approach again, being able to give constructive criticism, because they're there for support as well. You can't just say all the niceties and it lead to their growth. Sometimes growth is also through constructive feedback. And so I held this this part of the talk with the practice mentors from, oh gosh, from the name now. Anyway, with Annie Simpson from GPAD. And one of the things that I was trying to develop here was to say, well, this has previously been called a crap sandwich, yeah, where you say, you know, here's your strength and here's your strength, but actually this is what you need to improve. I call it a feedback sandwich. It's much kinder. But you can benefit these people's progress by giving them a little bit of constructive feedback. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before this, actually, after this, from all of this, we're building trust. And actually, before I move on to personal development, there is the key thing that the feedback is a tool. That last note there, really, really, really importantly, because I think we forget that regardless of a conversation with a peer or regardless of a conversation with your tutor, it is always about it being used as simply as a tool. These are all tools in our belt that we can then take forward into other conversations too, and I think that's really important to stress to, in my case, a young person, but it may be an architect, depending on your experience level. And then this is, again, another important thing. Well, everything's important in this. Mentorship for personal development. We too have something to gain from these relationships because it is a two-way relationship and it's a two-way street. It's fine for a mentee to actively participate and ask thought-provoking questions and remain present and display an interest. But when you work it around the other way, it's all just this one key word of agency and both showing agency in this relationship. And here are just a couple of really key things that you might build from that. So you will build a sense of purpose if you are on the other side of that mentoring relationship. You will have this opportunity to improve your leadership because clearly all the statistics show that you are going to inevitably become a better leader if you are and have a structured framework for mentoring. It engages with a unique set of knowledge. You will learn something from them, and it prompts us to reflect on our own experiences. You may not have met someone from that background before, and you will learn about that too, as hopefully you have from my background today. And the whole thing is, it's about being a catalyst for personal growth and development. The next few slides are me shamelessly telling you about Noted Practice and what we do. We host, or not host, but we have participated in more practice-based work, so competitions. Do a lot of writing, so Homegrown Plus in the middle there, and Neil at the back, where we did this study trying to understand how we can improve the ratio and numbers of students coming into architecture from underrepresented backgrounds. And on the right-hand side here, we've got our mentoring program. This is just a poster from last year, but we started off 5 years ago with a simple thing to say, well, I have family that are doctors and nurses and pharmacists, and I was sat in my room designing an office lobby, and I wasn't helping anyone, so I wanted to help someone because my parents always said we should help someone. And this is the 5-year sprawl of our network. We had 250 students that we were seeing over that year period, which is more than an academic year at university, way more. But we had some really interesting and hard and heartwarming at the same time conversations with these people that were struggling through COVID. And where are we now? So every month we host mentoring sessions in practice settings with the support of the practices themselves, giving up their time and their people to help and support young individuals. In some cases we have a 2-to-1, in some cases we have a 1-to-1, but it's all based on that choreographed approach of what do they need in that very specific moment. We've been to HFM. The last one was Arab, just held on at Wilkinson, Levitt Bernstein, Stanton Williams. And just to say that it's going well. It's going really well. And I'd like to continue doing more of this because the students and the mentees say really nice things. And I'm saying all of this, hopefully quite humbly, in the sense that hopefully this gives you tools to be able to do it yourselves too. Because I don't want to frankly be the only person that's doing it, because you all are already in your own settings and in your own spaces. But it is, I like this one because it says it's career-wise therapy. It keeps you on track and it lets you expand your knowledge and your network too, just by speaking and being here as well. And just to say, these are the people we're working with at the moment, which is, and I always jokingly say that the death of narrative practice will be a success because it means we're no longer needed. And just a simple call to action at the end, that mentee-mentor relationship where one takes the agency and the other one shares their experience, is reciprocal. And perhaps now, in this sort of Q&A format, we can maybe share some of our own conversations and stories too. And that's it, really. Thank you very much.
What I'd love to see is more of the collaborators actually instituting and setting up their own mentoring units within their practices, supported by you.
Yep.
You know, they see how it works so successfully,
Yep.
and then that gives them the confidence and the skills to set it up.
I completely
Because
agree.
that would save you the time of actually going and, you know, you run it monthly, it could potentially scale up to sort of every week.
Yep.
But you've got limited resources, so if you they could be your inheritors,
Yeah.
so long as they have the right values and ethics behind it.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, because there is only one of me and maybe 20 of our group, but actually there are other groups doing these type of things in London. I'm not obviously the only one. You know, there's a POC in architecture, there's Black Females in architecture, there's Arts Emergency. There are various different mentoring organisations or supporting organisations, but what I would say, just bringing it into practice, just to focus on that point a little bit, we also do give the practices the opportunity to sit with us and improve their own internal mentoring programs too. I may not have all the answers, and I know I won't have all the answers, is the key thing I'd like to share, because as I've tried to explain, is that I might not be the right person for that practice or that individual at any given point. I'm not oblivious to the fact that my experience is also limited, of course. And so therefore I always go and ask, and hence trying to distribute it within the practice networks. Once that's set up, that's a great point to be, or a stage to be at. But to bring it into academia would be really hitting the nail on the head. So having design tutors, having technical tutors, having, I don't know, very specific lectures from people, and their names would be listed, wouldn't they, at the end of the year. Well, why not have the mentors that supported, and not just the pastoral care mentors? I mean, mentors that come in and support you with imposter syndrome presentations, or generally keeping eye contact. That's quite a tough thing to say out loud, but even I struggle, you know, and it's having those conversations to say, okay, we can have the confidence. Or putting your work at eyeline when people are sat down and not having it up there. These are just small conversations. I'm talking about it from a very academic perspective, but also in presentations with in professional practice. But these, I think it all stems from there. I'd love for universities and practices to take this on.
Exactly. I mean, both in academia and in practice, across the whole range of built environment professionals, there's so much to be gained from the personal, which is inherently political, to the overtly political, dealing with office politics. Friends of mine working in local government, which is can be particularly top down in a way that seems sort of like stepping back into, really into the past, and people struggle to make sense of how to do teamwork. But I think your point about everyone learning how to do better teamwork is really fundamental. How can I be a better team worker or team member? How can I encourage my teammates to become better team players?
Absolutely.
Team playing, in an age which is unfortunately riven with division everywhere we look.
Yep, and it's not getting any better anytime soon.
And a lot of people are inherently very team-minded in any case, but it just helps if they have a few more, they have the tools to develop their confidence, to actually articulate some of these things about becoming, about working together more effective. It's not about effectiveness purely in terms of productiveness. It's about the psychological value of how you learn and you reciprocate.
But inherently you will be more productive if you do that anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
I wondered, to throw this beyond our conversation now perhaps, because some of you did mention that you have mentored and mentee and have been a mentee. Are these in practice situations, or are these your own set-up scenarios where someone's come to approach you for? I just wonder, just putting the question out there as a sort of reverse Q&A, because I'm very intrigued personally.
So I've not mentored, but I've been asked to mentor, but I've not accepted that because I'm a recent undergraduate graduate, so I didn't feel I was in the position to give. But from a mentee perspective, I received mentorship through the BFA, which you mentioned, Black Females in Architecture, and also from the Women in Architecture programme. And those are things that I've just started and they're kind of running simultaneously, but I get kind of two different perspectives. And then the third one, which I have, is through my practice. I received support from them as I was doing my financial support from them as I was doing my undergraduate, and they partnered me with someone there. And then I ended up to go back to work there, so it just kind of continued. But that was for context of, to answer your question.
That's great to know. And just to maybe comment on the first thing you mentioned, being an undergraduate student, you still have lots of experience to share with those who are going through the process. One of the, I'd love to flash it on the screen, but we have these schedules every month that we ask our long-term mentees or mentees, what would you like to speak about this month? And one of the things that I've realised is the experience level of, for example, let's say yourself, an undergraduate, working in practice, working in practice, can still support that person that's in their second year looking for help. So that choreography of being able to pair someone like yourself who might be thinking about becoming a mentor, but then again, in a safe space with another mentor, and that 2-to-1 mentoring relationship would then support you, would then support the person in giving the primary advice, but also the mentee. So it's a cyclical thing when you get into that framework of it all. And I wonder, and I also, the Women in Architecture group are fantastic. I'm also mentoring with them this year. And I think there's this point of, I think I got really frustrated last year, which was, there was only 20%, or maybe even 15% of the mentors that were male, or male identified. I thought that was really silly, and I just didn't know about it last year, but this year I do, and so I'm putting forward, and our group also mentors for them and with them, because we think that everyone should be sharing these relationships.
Interlinked kind of network.
Exactly.
I think being with different organisations, like different mentorship groups, at one point feel concerned that it was too many chefs or like too many people, but I found they each brought something different. For example, in the practice, white man is giving me advice, then in women in architecture, it's a brown woman, and then in the of Asian heritage, and then a black woman of Caribbean heritage from black females in architecture. So kind of a bit of myself in everyone, and also they have different experiences which I found helpful.
Yes, not to put you on the spot, but Karen joins us quite regularly for mentoring. Karen's an architect at WATG, and it's interesting to bring in that external experience into our program too, because we were at MSMR, but they had people, and then you came in, and it's a nice meshing of that situation.
Yeah, and just to add to your conversation about being both a mentor and mentee at the same time, I've been very lucky in the sense that, should I speak louder because it's gonna echo?
How do you wish?
So I've been very lucky in the sense that throughout my undergrad and master's degrees, I've encountered really good tutors and like formed really good like personal connections with them even after the degree itself, and like after that I didn't feel any barrier or anything for me to just like reach out to them and ask for advice about anything, because I think particularly after my master's, that was like the tail end of COVID. That was really challenging. No one really knew what they were doing. Neither did the tutors, but I think having that sort of personal relationship with a mentor was very helpful for me to navigate where I wanted to go, what I wanted to be. And then of course like I came across you guys on Instagram and social media and thought like, I could give back in a sense by being a mentor. And I also use that as a sort of sounding board for this thing that we have in our office internally, which is a structured mentoring platform. Like we all put in our details, our interests, our goals and aspirations onto this portal, and we get matched with someone in the office. It doesn't really need to be someone who's more senior, junior, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is your aspirations and your interests are aligned. And then that sort of just like opens a door to connecting with people that you wouldn't usually talk to in the office. And WTG is a global firm, so it really doesn't need to be someone from the London office. It could be someone from Singapore or Shanghai or the US, whatever. So I think that's a more structured way to approach mentoring. Narrative practice is a bit more, slightly more informal in a way. And I think it's a bit more personal, and I think that's what the sort of corporate side of mentoring is lacking. So different ways of doing mentoring and different outcomes from the different methods, I think.
Yeah, it's nice to hear that the practice has taken it
Yeah.
fully on board, and you also do the double shot.
Yeah.
Expressing. That was a coffee joke, but you share all of your learnings in a public forum after your mentoring, which is quite nice. I think it's a good example actually. And I I'm leading the conversation here a bit too much, but I'm trying to throw it back every now and then.
Well, it would be great to hear from anyone else who's got personal experience of narrative practice.
I've been mentored by all sorts of different people. So like I've got such wide-ranging interests that I need guidance from lots of people. So I was part of the Accelerate program when I was 16. So I was matched with an architect at HFM, and then that led on to me knowing about this apprenticeship route that was quite new at the time into architecture, and that led me to thinking, hey, HFM might be even a possible thing to do. And then he was then my mentor as an apprentice. Well, he was my apprenticeship coordinator, and that really helped. Like, if it wasn't for him, I feel like I would have just not completed the apprenticeship or even done an apprenticeship in the first place. That was really important to me. Since then, I have decided to like kind of pivot away from being an architect to more like architecture adjacent. And it took me a while to have the courage to actually admit that to my mentor. It was so scary. Like, I was crying, he was crying. Anyway, but like, yeah, he's still very supportive of what I'm doing, and yeah, it was a lot actually but yeah, I think those tools of like how to interact with people who are more senior than you, but also those like how to interact with people who are more like just a step before you, because I also had the thing of, so I was an Accelerate mentee, and then they said, hey, you should be a mentor. And I was like 19 at the time, and I was like, what? They don't want to be mentored by me. So it was only a few years after that I realised, oh, actually, I can be a mentor. So that led on to people doing the apprenticeship route. So yeah, I was in the same situation where I was saying no a few times.
Yeah.
I was saying yeah. But yeah.
I like the term architecture adjacent.
Yeah.
It's so interesting, because I think,
Yeah.
I don't know if you had anyone had experiences of myself personally, of how you navigate mentorship for someone that might be questioning their role within the industry at all. Like, I've had and I'm having moments where I'm like, okay, maybe architect is not the title that I should be aspiring to hold or to have, but it should be something within that space. And I sometimes question, is continuing in mentorship a good idea if you think you realise that you should be architecture adjacent or off the most trodden path?
I feel that way sometimes. I know I started off by saying I like having 3 feet in these different spaces, but I'm more and more deciding over time that maybe architecture is less of a practice of building and more of a practice of the people, and that's kind of the adjacent thing for me. Just on the note of the mentors, as in my own mentor, I found it really tough to find myself a mentor, which was really interesting after saying so much about it. And one of my mentors is, her name is Helen. She works at Deloitte, and she's a knowledge manager, which has nothing to do with architecture, but kind of is architecture adjacent, because it's about systems and about frameworks that she employs with her own teams. And Deloitte's massive, and they can do all these massive research projects and within their own teams. And probably like doing a project on a city as a practice. It's really interesting. But I say something out loud to her about me wanting to set a goal for 6 months' time. I'd like to achieve this, and she'll say, okay, this is how you could do it. And I'm like, yeah, if I did that in the sort of more architecture way, that wouldn't be possible in 6 months, or like be a completely different way of thinking, and it gives you that. Yeah, I think at some point she said you should, just going back to your point about sharing the framework. She said franchise it, and I thought, I've never even thought about it in that term. But it's a really positive thing, I think. But I wondered if, like, just to flip it on its head from mentee to perhaps mentor, and I'm sort of more looking at peripheries here, just about more experience in yourself as well. Of course, you mentioned mentoring, and I wonder what your experience has been like on the other side of that conversation, whether you still look for mentors too. Because I still see myself, so I'm 33 at the moment, I still see myself as relatively young. And I know that I have realised over time that age does not equal experience, in my case, very specifically. And so I just wondered, and again, to absolutely everyone really, whether you found that you still need those mentors?
Well, I would say personally that yes, absolutely, because we need mentors for lots of different things. Some people have just got the right attitude instinctively, so it's beyond age, Others are very, very wise about things like, and you mentioned these 2 fundamental life skills, things that we need to have build our sense of capacity to deal with. One is being really very strong about failure and dealing with failure, and the other one is about how to give and receive constructive criticism. Now, who in this room can fess up and say they've not come unstuck on either of those or both of those topics? Because you know, we all grow up in different family contexts or environmental contexts where we fear criticism, we fear giving it, we fear taking it, we're worried about failure, and then in fact failure turns out to have a silver lining, all those things. And I think exactly as you're saying, that means the mentor doesn't need to be somebody who knows the ins and outs of being an architect necessarily. So maybe we could bring Mike Tonkin in here. Would you like to talk about, have you been a mentor, or are you looking for mentors still?
We're
Always.
definitely looking for mentors still.
Yeah.
And I think, it's all a cycle of learning and teaching. And I think practice is called practice because actually you're learning through practice. And I think teaching, we also learn through teaching. And I think I learned more as a teacher than I did as a student, I think. And I think that's really interesting, but the two are so interwoven. I think that, and the people, maybe when I started so many years ago, I started work in 77, they weren't really called mentors, they were mentee. They were just people who kind of pushed you along the way and guided you, because I came from a comprehensive school. I left when I was 15, and being dyslexic, you're kind of marginalised slightly, and somehow I found my way. My friends were all bricklayers and gas fitters and forklifts and things, but somehow I ended up being an architect, but only because certain people along the way kind of mentored me into push me here or push me there. And so I'm sort of very grateful for that. And I think we're now in a position where we've been around a while, we've been around the block a few times, and it's time to kind of try and give something back, and I think we're in a time where practice is changing so much. The whole thing's up on its head, and I think it's been the hardest 2 years in practice probably we've ever had. And we've had a sort of all-woman office for the last couple of years, but actually recently we haven't got any full-time staff left at all, and everyone's sort of freelance because the work has literally just dried up, and so we're going back into teaching again a little bit, but in a kind of different way. So a little bit like you're doing, going into practices, but also we're traveling. The other great thing, I think, some of your mentors are actually quite often for me. They're the masters, and I've spent many years of my life traveling and seeing buildings. You understand architecture through another architect's voice, even when they're not there. And I think that's a really important thing. And a lot of people who are younger haven't really had the opportunity to travel, which we had. Our generation did have that. And so we're now planning a trip to India, where we want to go around to all the Indian colleges and do workshops and lectures. But that's different to being a mentee and a mentor, because I think that relationship's very personal and one-to-one. So we're going to be doing it in a slightly different way, but definitely feel like I suppose I'm here because I wanted to know how you're doing it.
I'd argue that it's just a different definition of mentoring, isn't it? You mentioned that perhaps it's not so one-to-one, but actually maybe there is a definition of it where it's support. Maybe there is a definition of it where it's knowledge sharing and being able to give those opportunities to people. Maybe that is mentoring. I started off by saying there are so many different definitions of it. I think what you've got planned is fantastic. We're also having some difficulties in practice at the moment, by the way. It's never going to be, one of my roles as the associate in the practice is going and finding work. Well, how do I find work if all of the other much more larger practices are coming in, or actually there's just not enough work for everyone anyway? And so that was kind of the point I made about going and finding our own work by seeing if there are any infills that we can actually find public money for to support and engage communities. That was one of the reasons. But we've moved into a 5-person office. Today we went to go and see a downsized office because that is the situation. But even in those settings and situations, the openness, I'm sure, is apparent in your office too, where you've got to share that information across, and that could be another form of mentoring too, because it's just making people aware and acknowledging that practice isn't always fun, lovely, and full of design, and it's unfortunately got all those written words that you have to.
Recessions do bring us an advantage. They somehow stop us, and you just stop churning out whatever you were going to be doing, and all of a sudden you have to kind of rethink about yourself and your action. And so I think, you know, because I've now seen 6 recessions, because I got an extra one in by travelling around the world and having a practice in Hong Kong, I ran into recession. So I got an extra one in there. But and they've been each time we've learned that actually, if it's coming, there's nothing you can do about it, and what you can't do is blame yourself, and you have to act quickly so that you can be more responsible to the people you work with, and I think that's been important. But also you have to kind of then completely reboot how you're going to do it. So we're now getting personal coaches and trainers to teach us. So we're back in the student role again, and I think we need to kind of, because I think, who knows, it's going to take a year or two while the world's going to kind of be shaken up for a little bit. But I think we're all going to have to rethink how we operate and what we do and how we survive.
Really impressive that you're getting coaches too. I think it's a great position to be in, to be able to say that you're going to bring in coaches, and I think there is a sort of perhaps reality that maybe others may not be able to. And I just wonder, just from your experience in that case, do you think that these are opportunities for everyone? You're creating these opportunities by giving them to others, and I'm not just going to. Do we think that, you know, it's an open thing where you can just reach out to someone? What's our sort of gut on whether you can just reach out to someone at the moment for support? Can you not? Yes, no. Got a few nods. What do you think? What's your view?
I have a little bit of everybody here, from what I hear, they have a very positive experience. Mine was a little bit different.
Okay.
I moved countries a lot. So I got my degree from Malaysia. I got my master's degree also from Malaysia. I was in a public school. There were only 3 internationals and about 100 locals. So you can feel like intimidated in the beginning, but as you said, that number at the end, I think when we graduated, we were only 23 people. I established myself there and everything, and COVID happened. I had to move again, and I moved here. And when I moved here, different world, different everything. I relate so much to the imposter syndrome that you were talking about, because I didn't understand the industry here. I didn't understand, like, yeah, I can relate to it, but not really. Like, I had to read from the beginning. I had to get my strength. I had to apply to hundreds of jobs that I got rejected from almost all of them, because just my experience did not align. And yeah, I was reaching to people. I was literally just asking, hey, would you let me just volunteer, help you out? Just, I'm free, I can do 2 jobs, I'm very keen, until one said yes. And that's all I needed. And yeah, I still reach out to all my lecturers back in Malaysia, but at the same time, the one person that said yes helped me out start a little practice for myself, which is only like a 3D visualization. And I worked for him as assistant, just an architect assistant. We built up, and he was he's actually a property developer, and he's an architect, but he's also like just developing his own stuff, and he's doing just like residential housing here and there and selling them. And it's been amazing. I'm not gonna lie, like it takes the one person. Like, you can't just stop. And I understand how many people would go into architecture and at some point they will realize, like, oh, maybe it's not for me. Maybe everything around me is against me, so I can't keep going. That title of being an architect is gonna be extremely hard for me, but you just have to keep going and reach out as much as you can. Only takes one person to say yes, and everything changes.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that it worked out to be a positive experience in the end. But I understand that. Yeah, not everyone may feel like they can give something back as part of that relationship. They might have wanted to start with you as well. And yeah, I'm glad you found that moment where you were able to then push forward with what you're doing now. I think these were really positive things. Jeevan.
Yeah, I think one thing with architecture is that you can get really lost very easily, both within education and within practice as well. We were speaking about this literally this time last week, but I think the nature of how to actually become an architect, you know, you just very stop-start. You have to go through part one, then to part three, part two, part three, and in some cases they're in very different universities and different settings. So at one point, do you find that mentor figure in your life, and you know, you somehow end up finding someone else, maybe in different settings and different environments. But for me, like you said, it was difficult to find that one person. But then I think once you get the opportunity to, for me, it was to get into practice. I kind of ran with that, different opportunities and different avenues open up. But I think there's also a conversation on, within education itself, how can universities become those mentors to students, or especially when those tutors aren't practitioners or they're not experienced within the realm itself. So how can they actually provide that experience or that knowledge? You know, one of the key things that came out of your presentation was, the key word was practice. How can those tutors provide that knowledge if they're not practitioners themselves or haven't been in practice for
To be devil's advocate, design tutors know design.
Yeah.
Or maybe more experienced to teach design. They may not be the right person to teach you practice.
Yeah.
So again, with that same sort of mentorship model, maybe there is someone else that needs to come in and do that for. And so I think there is perhaps, I'm sort of going back and forth between being a student and being a design tutor and thinking, well, what would I have wanted at that time versus what am I able to give? Because I'm not able to give everything that student might need, or that young person might need, but I'm also wanting to at the same time, so I've then got to find the right people to be able to. So just to balance that point there, because it's tough on both sides, and that sounds awful to say because I'm not too far away from being a student either, but I now realise that there is a moment where you need specific people for certain types of conversation. I might not be the best for technical studies. So tomorrow I'm hosting a technical surgery where I've brought 4 people in to help me because I'm very good at technical detailing. I can do all the design part. See where I'm going with that?
I guess there's a conversation on, you know, who then goes into those universities to do it, and how does that happen? You have things like the Reba mentoring scheme. They're not as regular as I guess students might want them. For myself, when I went into it, I was partnered up with a practice for a month, and we spoke maybe 3 times, and then that's it. And what happens next? You know, should it be more of a regular kind of meetings that you set up? But who's in charge of that? Is that Reba themselves? Is it the universities? I think that's probably a conversation.
To answer that question, the RIBA is in charge.
Yeah.
They control that it's 3 sessions. It's dictated by them. Being on the other side as a practice, I signed up, and it says you do 1 session where you talk, meet with them, 2 where you take them to site, and 3 where you do a CV and portfolio workshop. There is no pastoral element of it. Yes, the RIBA, just to point blank say it out loud. But again, I've been having those conversations with the people that are thinking of changing these things. So specifically, there is, and this goes back to HFM, Ash Goyal and another person, John Neha, the new Reba London director. Want to maybe stir things up a little bit with that, because I agree, it's just 3 times, it's a bit crazy. Anyway, that's a very, very specific example. But I think that sort of goes across the industry quite a bit, and the ins and outs, and I think you mentioned that the industry's, the academic situation is being turned on its head as well, with perhaps the removal of the parts in themselves. We've got the funding taken away from the level 7 apprenticeships. I don't know what I'd do without Emily. My Emily, sorry, not you, Emily. Emily Cater, who's she's a second of fourth year from London there doing level 7. And I think it's fantastic that I'm able to say, this is how you practice. And then also, oh yeah, of course you go to university and do your design studio. I think that's the best way of being, this is a very personal opinion, being in practice. You should be learning whilst you practice, and I think you touched on it earlier. I think that's one of the ways. And just coming perhaps back to this idea of mentoring, just maybe, I don't know how we're doing time, but just to say
We
that...
should just have one more question.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's been tremendous.
Well, I just wanted to
And
know...
Neil Pinder's got that
Well,
question.
exactly, he's got that last question. I just wanted to say that this isn't... I kind of was hoping that it didn't turn out to be a Q&A, sort of me just answering
No,
things,
it's
because
been
the
a
whole point of
conversation.
this is it has to be a conversation. It
It has
can't just be... I'm not the fountain of knowledge. I'm definitely not. I'm like, you know my background. Neil, hi.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for your talk. It was really informative, and I loved the way it was graphically put forward, so that I can understand anyway. I think there's several layers. So number one, what we take is the circular economy of architectural education, which I sum up, and which you've described, is in which you're part of, you guys, where you start off and then you're maybe the accelerate student, you go in, you're 19, but you know more than the person that's coming in who's 16, 17. So you can give them at the grassroots level the circular economy of what you've learned. And then as you progress up the scale, it's still this circular motion that goes around, because as you said, not everybody knows everything. And the other thing, I've got a couple of things, I'll be quick. Imposter syndrome, that is the biggest one, and you were so right. I think everybody who comes from the global south, or not of the traditional sort of linear patterns into architecture, have some sort of imposter syndrome about them, or because they feel that, are they the right person in the room? And they're always asking themselves that question. And it could be about class, etc., etc. And the last thing, hopefully, is that, collaboration is the key. It is the real key. As I say to loads of people, just connect on different platforms. Connect to whoever you think, but be loyal and be truthful is the most particular thing you need to be. So, because there's a saying, and it's a global saying, the people you meet on the way up are the same people you meet on the way down, and you can't guarantee that you're going to be up there all the time. So as you learn, you make sure you bring other people with you along, so that you're going to call upon them one day, definitely. And that's where the circular economy keeps on rolling, and that's how, to coin a phrase, we change the narrative.
Completely agree.
And I would love to work with you. Yeah.
We already do, Neil. We already do. Just on that collaboration point, when Narrative Practice won the Diversity in Action Award last year, I went up into the stage and I was getting really pissed off, annoyed, that there were all these amazing people in the room doing all these really wonderful, amazing things, and no one was working together. And so I said it out loud, and then I got no one talking to me still, because it's this awful thing when you have these awards where you're competing, but actually when on this topic you should be competing. It's just like everyone should be winning. Is that a weird thing to say out loud? Yeah.
I think it stems from education, where it's kind of an individualist kind of
Yes, absolutely.
mentality, where you're constantly working for yourself or for just your tutor, and then you come out and then it's like, no, you're doing this for other people, not just yourself.
It's ingrained, focused education is not a good format or a framework for creative thinkers or want people who want to go outside of that box ever so slightly, just grow. Everyone wants to grow, you know, but you've got this box.
I think just to add to the point about collaboration and working together and growing together, I think, yes, there are like mentoring platforms and structures in place, but maybe what's most important, like that comes out of this evening, is that we need to equip people with the courage to seek out for mentorship for themselves and to take initiative, because like ultimately you know what you need, or you might not, but like you're sort of trying to navigate that, and maybe having that sense that you know you're enough to ask for people's help and direction, and you know even if the answer is no, that's okay. Just having that sort of assurance in yourself is quite important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing.
That's a great note to end on, I think.
I agree.
So